I'm going to be arguing with the facts presented instead of the people's feelings presented in the video, because it's kind of hard to argue with someone's feelings on how they feel on a certain subject, because feelings are subjective, not objective. It's important to note that just because you suffered through an experience does not make you an expert in all things that occurred during that experience. Just because you were in a school during a school shooting does not make you an expert on guns or policy pertaining to guns.
First off, I'm going to start off by putting this price tag right here as a reminder for you guys to know how much Marco Rubio took for every student's life in Florida. $1.05.
I'd venture to say that everyone cares deeply about what happened in Parkland. And just because we disagree with you politically does not mean that we do not care about what happened in Parkland.
But we should make everybody go through a background check.
While I do agree with the universal background checks, I do not think that by any means there should be a database with everyone's information who has ever purchased a gun before, because it does not only make it easier for the government to take guns away, but it also allows criminals to target specific houses with or without a gun depending on their motives if the database was public or hacked. According to PolitiFact, the 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 statistic for firearms purchased without a background check is actually false. It's more like 13% according to PolitiFact.
In Japan, people in Japan can own a gun if they do the following. If they attend an all-day class, pass a written test where they have to have 95% accuracy on a shooting range test, they have to pass a mental health evaluation, pass a rigorous background check including interviews of your friends and family, and every 3 years they must go back and retake the class and the initial exam. And as a result, Japan has virtually no gun deaths.
Japan's low crime rate is not new. It's been extremely low for decades, and the suggestion that it's because of legislation affecting guns, which is why Japan's crime rate is so low, is not true. The reason Japan has a low crime rate is because of a strong culture of passivity and a belief in dishonoring the family to do something evil. Another reason why Japanese crime rates are so low is because of their extremely efficient legal system, where 99% of all suspects are convicted and the police solve 98% of all homicides.
We're really lucky here in the state of California. We have some of the most progressive gun control policies in the nation, and that's something to be celebrated.
It's hard to tell which 16 states you use in your data, because there are actually 20 states as of 2017, according to the Washington Post, that have universal background checks for all firearm purchases. But what I can tell you is that between Texas and California, for the year 2014, they had identical murder rates, and California had more violent crime, even though California has stricter gun laws than Texas. This shows that although California has stricter gun laws, it doesn't actually prevent murder or violent crime. Another example of legislation not stopping crime is in Washington, D.C., which has higher murder rates than the rest of the nation, even though it has strict gun control.
And there's still more work that can be done and should be done. The problem really comes at the federal level, and so we really need to push for stronger restrictions.
While waiting periods may reduce the rate of firearm-related suicide, it does not reduce suicide. According to RAND.org, there is no consensus in studies that compare waiting period with suicide. Their conclusion? They identified no qualifying studies that estimated the effects of waiting periods on suicides.
Restrictions that are not about, taking people's constitutional rights away.
But they are about degrading the Second Amendment to a point where it's effectively removed.
That's not what the movement's interested in.
It's a little hard to say the movement isn't about removing guns from the hands of law-abiding citizens when this happens.
I have a dream that enough is enough. And that this should be a gun-free world. Period.
Oh yeah, the movement's not about removing guns. Yeah.
With the guns succeed more than 85% of the time. Suicide attempts with poison or overdoses succeed less than 2% of the time.
Firearms may be more lethal than other means of suicide, but it does not mean we should make general policy that affects everyone because of an experience that only some go through. If this logic were applied to all means of suicide, skyscrapers, rope, and razor blades would also presumably be banned.
Many mass shooters will actually actively post things in the forms of pictures, videos, and text online prior to their attacks.
Based on this stat, although 49% of mass shooters show signs of their intentions, often these signs are ignored, like at Parkland.
Not only did the FBI refuse to act on 2 strong tips, one of which involved the shooter posting on the internet that he planned to become a professional school shooter, which is illegal. That's a terrorist threat. The Palm Beach Sheriff's Office was told that the shooter had put a gun to others' heads in the past. The Florida Department of Children and Families ruled him stable despite clear evidence of self-harm. And at the school where the shooter killed 17 people, they knew he was cutting himself, threatening students, and taking pictures with guns, and that he may have ingested gasoline in an attempt to commit suicide. And nothing was done about any of these things. They did have the legal authority to go in and arrest him. They had the legal authority to ensure that he did not have weapons. They did not do any of those things. They dropped the ball. They really blew it.
In total, there were 39 phone calls to the local police and 2 tips to the FBI, and nothing was done. This is evidence that the government can't protect you in every situation, which is why you should be allowed to own a gun. But the solution that the left is offering is to give my guns to these incompetent people so they can fail to protect me again.
There was a 19-year-old who legally bought an AR-15, which is a weapon of war, and if he had been through the least bit of screening, somebody would have said this person does not need a weapon like that.
The least bit of screening?
The Palm Beach Sheriff's Office was told that the shooter had put a gun to others' heads in the past. The Florida Department of Children and Families ruled him stable despite clear evidence of self-harm. And at the school where the shooter killed 17 people, they knew he was cutting himself, threatening students, and taking pictures with guns, and that he may have ingested gasoline in an attempt to commit suicide.
Giving the government more legislation, if they do not enforce it, will not solve anything. They need to enforce the legislation on the books. Parkland would have been prevented if they enforced legislation already on the books. It is not the gun owners' fault. It is not because we don't have enough legislation. It is government's fault because they suck at everything. And the idea that I would hand my guns over to these people who can't even screen someone correctly is absurd.
I'm here today to buy a laser sight for my gun.
Why? What are the dangers that you think are out there?
It seems
more firearms might lead to more firearm crime, but does not lead to more crime overall. So from 1997 to 2016, the amount of violent crime has decreased dramatically. The crime rate has almost halved. The amount of guns, however, in the country during the same span of time has only increased, and increased dramatically. So that would actually suggest that more guns equals less crime. But there is no correlation between guns owned and crime.
it's like public events of terror and things like that are on the rise.
The statistic doesn't really prove anything because, of course, if he has access to a gun, he's going to have a higher chance of shooting someone. Because if you don't have access to a gun, you have no chance of shooting someone. I mean, it's kind of hard to shoot someone if you don't have a gun.
And so I think I'm often with my small children. I think it would make me feel more secure if I had a means of defending myself and my children.
The stats you use between women and guns suggest that you would rather have a gun-free society, which would mean that you want to remove the most effective way women have to deal with a rapist. I think it's amazing that women can defend themselves against stronger or bigger attackers. And I would rather see headlines that read, "Women killed would-be rapists," instead of "Women raped and left in an alley to die."
When people say guns don't kill people, people kill people. Yes, people kill people in direct proportion to the power of the guns that they have access to and choose to use or misuse.
The reason why armed victims are more likely to be killed is because they're a bigger threat to the assailant than someone who's unarmed.
I think the stats prove it, that more gun circulation, the less crime.
It's important to note that it leads to higher gun murder rate, not higher murder rate. Again, the amount of guns in the United States since 1997 has increased significantly, but the amount of crime has decreased. More guns does not mean more crime.
And if you look on the left there, the left side represents the number of mass shooters, and the bottom shows the amount of guns in a country. Now, where's America on this chart? There's America.
I question how the mass shooter statistic was recorded, as you'll see in this next clip.
There's a group called Everytown. Everytown is a gun control group. And Everytown said that there were 18 school shootings in the month of January. Now, you may be wondering, why didn't I hear about those school shootings every single day? The answer is because there were not 18 school shootings in the month of January. There were more like 3. Okay? Even one is terrible. But there were no mass school shootings, and the ones that exist are bad enough without you having to blow it up to 18. Okay? We can go through them. Right? ABC News said there were 18 school shootings in the first 45 days of 2018, according to Everytown. And New York Daily News said the same thing. But that's not true. Okay, twice, so they counted these as gun incidents on campus. Twice, someone shot themselves on a school grounds. One incident on January 3rd featured a man shooting himself in a former school's parking lot. On January 10th, a teen killed himself in an Arizona elementary school bathroom. Okay, that is not a school shooting. That is a school suicide. Okay, 4 times a bullet was fired through a school or dorm's window. A gunshot on January 4th was fired at a high school in Seattle through an office window. No one was hurt. On January 10th, a shot was fired shattering a California University classroom window. No injuries reported. The same day in Texas, a bullet was accidentally fired through a classroom wall at the Grayson College Criminal Justice Center. No one injured. On January 15th, a bullet traveled through a residential hall's dorm room. No injuries reported. On January 25th, a Mobile, Alabama high school student fired a gun on campus. No injuries. On January 26th, shots were fired from a car in a parking lot. No injuries. On February 5th, a 3rd grader pulled the trigger on a cop's gun. No one was injured. On February 8th, a shot was fired inside Metropolitan High School. No one was injured. Okay, there have only been a few cases in which someone was injured other than the shooter. January 22nd in Texas, a teenage girl was wounded by shots from a semi-automatic handgun. At the same day, a 14-year-old boy was injured in a shooting in Gentilly, Louisiana. February 1st, 5 children were injured in an accidental shooting, so that's not even a purposeful shooting, it's accidental. And finally, on February 5th, a teenager was shot and injured outside a high school. There are only 3 deadly shootings, apparently, in the last 45 days. So that is still awful. Every one of these is awful. Every one of these is tragic and terrible and an act of evil. That does not mean that 18 happened. So I think that it's just important to get the statistic correct. Like, this is you wonder why people don't trust the media. It's because the media don't bother to do any of this. They just give you the bottom line, 18 school shootings. And then the minute you dig into it, you realize there were not 18 school shootings. There were 3.
I think something really important to mention when talking about guns is their defensive use, which ranges, quote, from about 500,000 to more than 3 million. These numbers would suggest that firearms save more lives than they take. Do guns cause more crime? No, obviously not, because an inanimate object does not compel you to commit more crime.